This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Some people say eating hot chili peppers can help you breathe easier if you have a cold. Others believe that chilies give you more energy. All we know is that people have been growing chilies for centuries. And there are plenty of different kinds of chili peppers to choose from, along with different levels of heat. Want to spice up your meals with homegrown chilies? They need a warm climate. If you plant the seeds outside when the weather is cool, place a glass over them. That will add warmth from the sun and protect them from wind. You can also start the seeds in your home or a greenhouse. If you plant chili peppers inside, fill an 8-centimeter pot with soil. The pot should have holes in the bottom so water can run out. Tap the sides of the pot to settle the soil. Drop several seeds over the surface of the pot and cover with a thin layer of vermiculite. Vermiculite is a material that can hold air, water, and nutrients. Then cover the top of the pot with a see-through plastic bag. Hold the bag in place with a rubber band. Place the pot in a warm area. When the chilies start growing, take off the bag. When the plants have reached about 2 centimeters high, place each one carefully in its own 8-centimeter pot. When the roots show through the holes in the bottom of the pot, transplant each seedling into a 12-centimeter pot. When the plants are 20 centimeters high, tie the plants to a stick placed in the pot to support them. When the chili peppers are 30 centimeters high, pinch the tops off with your fingers. That should get new branches to grow. When the first flowers show, give the plants some potash fertilizer. When the weather is warm, put them into 5-liter pots and place them outside. Make sure they get a good amount of light and water. Some people like mild chilies. Others like plenty of heat. Some like to harvest the plants when the chilies are green. Others like their chilies red. Either way can give color and taste to many different foods. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. To read and listen to more stories about agriculture and for English teaching activities, go to voaspecialenglish.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report in Special English. A coffee-growing cooperative in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is giving former rebels and soldiers a fresh start. They are being encouraged to make a better and safer living from coffee. The cooperative, or co-op, is called Sopakdi. Its headquarters are in Minova, a town along Lake Kivu. Many people trying to escape conflict have moved there. The co-op began in 2003. The co-op's president, Joachim Munganga, says getting a fair trade certificate for the group's coffee took 2 years. The group had to meet standards for respect for the environment and workers' contracts. This year, the co-op won an organic certificate. It now has 7 buyers in Europe, the United States, and Japan. The purpose of the co-op is not simply to produce coffee. The founders of Sopakdi were trying to find ways to help resolve ethnic conflicts in the area. So they brought coffee producers together and persuaded them to form a co-op. Members of rival ethnic communities now work together at the co-op's different offices. They all work for themselves, but they also work together to elect leaders and promote common interests. There are trucks that take the coffee to Sopakdi's own washing station. There, a machine depulps or removes the outer flesh from the coffee berries that contain the beans. Doing this process by hand takes a long time and can mean a loss of freshness. About 160 people work at the washing station. Many were fighters in the past. One former rebel says he is very happy with his new job. He now spends his nights in a house instead of sleeping in the forest. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Peter Hoff used to export lilies and tulips from the Netherlands. He retired from the flower export business 7 years ago. Now, he is trying to help people grow trees and plants in the desert and save water. In many places, much of the fresh water supply is used for irrigation. Yet, most of that water may be lost through evaporation into the air. So, Peter Hoff has invented a simple plastic device called the Groasis Water Box. He says he got the idea from nature. He says if you look at the Rocky Mountains in the United States, you find trees all over the mountains. So trees are able to grow on rocks. They have very strong roots. Mr. Hoff says the trick is that nature does not dig a hole like we humans do to plant seeds. Nature plants the seeds through birds or animals on top of the soil. Their waste then acts as a cover. It prevents the humidity in the soil from evaporating. The Dutch inventor says he is simply copying that system. The water box is a round device about the size of a motorcycle tire. It sits flat on the ground with the bottom open to the earth. Seeds or a young planting grow out of a hole in the center. Some people call the water box a water battery because of its ability to collect and store water. The cover has deep ridges. These collect rainwater. But the device is designed to collect water even when there is no rain. The cover gets cold during the night and creates condensation. The water is collected through 2 holes. There is a siphon in the holes to carry the water to the soil. Peter Hoff says the nice thing about the siphons is that once collected, the water is not able to evaporate anymore. The roots of the plant may have to grow several meters deep to reach groundwater. Once growth is established, the box can be removed and used to start another planting. The company also makes a version for one-time use. Researchers at Mohammed I University in Oujda, Morocco, tested the water box for 3 years in the Sahara Desert. They said close to 90% of the trees planted with the device survived. Without it, they said only about 10% survived. Peter Hoff says he is now doing experiments with 20,000 water boxes in countries including Pakistan, Ecuador, and the United States. The reusable box now sells for about $15. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report in Special English. Have you ever thought about planting a garden but didn't think you had a spot with enough sunlight? Well, not all vegetables need a lot of sun. Mark Hoffman and his wife Gia own a guest house in Kempton, Illinois. They often serve their guests produce, fresh from the garden. The Hoffmans have been growing food and flowers for 25 years. For much of that time, Mark Hoffman has been experimenting with shade plantings. He says visitors to his website, greenhousebed.com, often ask how to plant in the shade. There are a lot of choices. For example, he grows tomatoes near oak trees. Big oak trees can produce a lot of shade. But Mark Hoffman says his tomato plants grow as long as they get 5 hours of direct sunlight each day. He also plants asparagus around a tree at its drip line. That is the area below the outer limit of the branches. The Hoffmans' website includes a list of vegetables, flowers, and herbs that have produced acceptably for them in partial shade. These include broccoli, daylilies, horseradish, Irish potatoes, oregano, and winter onions. Mark Hoffman says plants with wider leaves seem to do better in the shade. He also finds that his potatoes do better in partial shade than in full sun. Time of day, brightness of the sun, and shadows from trees, walls, and buildings all influence how much or how little sunlight falls on plants. Curtis Swift at Colorado State University says people interested in shade planting should also remember something else. The term shade can describe different amounts of darkness, and it can even mean different things in different parts of the world. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Food prices are down from their record highs in February of 2011, but prices are still higher than they were a year ago. In a year of Arab protests, high food prices helped fuel the anger against oppression, corruption, and poverty. Many experts think the political fires in Egypt and other countries started in the summer of 2010 in Russia. Heat, drought, and wildfires destroyed 1/3 of Russia's winter wheat crop. World food prices rose after Russia halted wheat exports. The last time food prices jumped was in 2008. At that time, Egypt was also among the countries where food riots and demonstrations took place. Riyaf Naqshbendi is a professor in the Department of International Business at American University in Washington. He agrees that food prices played a part in the Arab revolutions. At the end of the day, the most crucial reason for the Arab Spring is basically economic. And so, consequently, when a citizen cannot have enough money to purchase food and feed his family, definitely that will create a kind of upset with the system. Professor Naqshbandi says an event like climate change can affect food production in many countries. But in a globally connected economy, even an event in one country can be felt worldwide. Cornell University economist Chris Barrett says another problem is that gains in farm production have slowed. He says, "What we are seeing right now is the bitter harvest of very poor investments in agriculture research over really the last 20 years. Shenjin Fan is head of the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. He says the return of high prices in 2011 offers some important lessons. If investment in food production does not increase, he says, then the world will continue to see high prices, and price hikes will come more often. He says food supplies are not growing enough to meet the demand of 7 billion people. The world is expected to add 2 billion more by the middle of the century. And people in emerging economies like China are eating more meat, which requires more animal feed. But in 2011, for the first time, the United States used more maize or corn for biofuels than for animal feed. The good news is that high prices always encourage farmers to grow more. A record harvest in 2011 is helping to ease food prices in many parts of the world, but not all. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Last week, we discussed how to grow vegetables in partial sun. This week, we learn how to protect vegetables from too much sun. Curtis Swift is an extension agent at Colorado State University. He says shading plants from intense sunlight in hot weather can increase production. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and okra and other members of that family drop flower buds and young fruit when the plant temperatures exceed 32 degrees Celsius. Plants can get sunburn. Yellow spots may appear on their leaves and fruit. These areas can become thin and white as plant tissue is affected. Curtis Swift says shade can help correct these problems. What it does is it actually allows the plant to give off adequate water, which cools the tissue. He suggests shading plants with bed sheets, shade cloth, or brush. In other words, sticks and branches. Cut them about 1 meter long and stand them in the ground on the south and west sides of plants. Anything you can put over the plant. A lot of people can cut brush at the edge of the field and stick that into the soil on the south and west side of the plant and provide some shade. Curtis Swift says if you use cloth sheeting, suspend it at least 5 centimeters above the plants. That way there is enough space for bees to fly around. Be careful not to cover plants too closely. which could trap heat and defeat the purpose of shading. People can also buy canopies to shelter their plants. Some canopies have narrow strips of metal or wood to provide either sunlight or shade, depending on the position of the sun. Curtis Swift says shading works with field crops as well as vine crops, like squash. People sometimes plant shrubs or trees to shade their vegetables, but he says tree roots compete with the vegetable roots. The veggies may not get enough nutrients and water. Now, here are a few comments on last week's report about shade growing. Ko from South Korea wrote, "I can't imagine plants in the shade for most of the day without sunshine. That's a really creative idea." Andy in Chile wrote, "This is an interesting article, but you forget that the shadow allows the growth of the fungi." And Slava in Croatia recalled, "Once I grew small tomatoes on a balcony under a roof. Sun shone there only in the afternoon. In October, the plants had only a few green tomatoes. I took them inside behind the window, and they had ripe fruits on Christmas and the entire winter." For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Today we discuss the greenhouse effect. Farmers and gardeners have long used greenhouses to extend the growing season in cold weather. Now, hoop houses are gaining popularity. Hoop houses are sometimes called temporary greenhouses or passive solar greenhouses. A hoop house is basically a metal frame covered with plastic or other all-weather material. A common design looks like a high tunnel. Unlike a greenhouse, which uses a heating system, a hoop house is heated by the warmth of the sun. Now, the United States Department of Agriculture has announced a program to help farmers who want to build hoop houses. The department, through its Cooperative State Research, Education, and Extension Service, has been supporting a project in Michigan. That state has a short growing season. As part of the research project, 9 farmers were given materials and trained how to build and use a hoop house. The results showed that well-managed hoop houses can grow high-quality crops. However, crops are not the only things that grow well. The research found that weeds grow faster in a hoop house. Weeding, seeding, and watering requires at least as much work as crops grown in the open air. The researchers also advise growers to add compost material to the soil in hoop houses to build nutrients. Elliot Coleman is an organic farmer and a writer in Maine who has helped popularize the idea of 4-season farming. His ideas about hoop houses sounded good to John Birnbaum in the horticulture department at Michigan State University. Professor Birnbaum tried hoop houses on the student organic farm at Michigan State and had success. Project director David Connor says it was a test drive for the research on private farms. The agricultural economist points to the demand for locally grown crops. People are hungry for good, fresh vegetables, he says. Hoop houses for winter growing can even be found at the White House, where First Lady Michelle Obama has a vegetable garden. The houses are small because of limited space on the south lawn. A hoop house specialist at Michigan State University, Adam Montry, has videos on YouTube explaining how to build one. You can go to voaspecialenglish.com and find a link to his videos and also a link to our videos on YouTube. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Irrigation systems can make a big difference in agricultural production. Irrigation can also improve the lives of farm families. However, a new study says bringing water to dry areas can also spread malaria. The study describes how irrigation water can lead to an increase in malaria cases, an increase that can last for years. Malaria is spread by mosquitoes. The insects reproduce in standing water. So when a dry area is irrigated, the disease can appear and spread. Mercedes Pasquale is a scientist at the University of Michigan. She and her team studied areas in northern India where irrigation systems were built over a number of years. They compared how malaria progressed with the spread of irrigation. She and the other scientists found that after farmers began irrigating their crops, the risk of malaria rose sharply. At first, the team thought the number of cases rose because there was little effort to control mosquitoes. But the study found that was not the case. The researchers found that high rates of malaria continued for 10 years or longer, even after mosquito control efforts were in place. Mercedes Pasquale suggests that irrigation projects need to limit places where mosquitoes might reproduce. She also says health officials may need to try other methods of malaria prevention that would work for long periods of time. The researchers agree that irrigation helps farming in areas with low rainfall. But Mercedes Pasquale and her team discovered that irrigation also can bring years of high rates of malaria. The only way to avoid the problem is through better planning and control measures. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Onions come in different sizes, shapes, colors, and flavors, from mild and sweet to hot and strong. A full-grown onion plant has roots, bulbs, and leaves. The leaves are long, thin, and hollow. They stand straight up and thicken at the bottom to form a bulb. Onions are biennials. Their life cycle is 2 years long, but they are usually picked during their first year, after flowers form and the bulbs stop growing. Onions grow best in loose, fertile soil. They can grow in many different climates. In cooler climates, onions may need 14 to 15 hours of daylight to start forming bulbs. In warmer climates, onions can begin developing bulbs with fewer hours of daily sun. Organic material like compost or leaf mulch can help onions grow in heavy soil. Barbara Fick is an extension agent at Oregon State University in the northwestern United States. She says a faster way to grow onions is to plant small bulbs known as sets instead of seeds. Onions can be harvested once their tops have dried and fallen over. You can store onions for months. But Barbara Fick says stored onions need to be cured first. Curing is a way of making sure those leaves on the outside are nice and dry. Here are some directions from editors at the National Gardening Association. First, dry the onions in the sun for a day or so. Then, bring them out of direct sun for 2 to 3 weeks. Spread them out in any warm, airy place that is covered. Or cover the onions with a light cotton sheet held in place with stones along the edge. The sheet will keep the sun from burning the bulbs. Don't worry about rain. And do not use a plastic or canvas sheet. Heavy coverings will trap moisture and keep the onions from drying fully. Turn the bulbs a couple of times to help them dry evenly. After curing the onions, you can hang them indoors in mesh bags to dry even more. There should be no wet spots on the onions when they are put in storage. Editors at the National Gardening Association say the longer onions are cured, the better they will keep. Some people cut off the top leaves before curing onions. If you do that, do not cut the leaves any closer than 2.5 centimeters from the bulb. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more stories about gardening, including more advice about growing onions, go to voaspecialenglish.com. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Bulbs are underground plant stems. They provide food for a shoot. Some bulbs produce flowers year after year. Gardening experts say tulips, daffodils, and other bulbs are not very difficult to grow. Bulbs do well in climates with a cold season. They are placed in the ground about the time of the first frost. But with the right preparation, they can also grow well in places where the ground never freezes. Mike Lizotte of American Meadows, an online store, says before you start, you need know whether to plant tender bulbs or hardy bulbs. If you live in a cold area, a tender bulb will need special care when the growing season is over. Mike Lizotte says if you want that bulb to survive or come back, you would need to literally dig it out of the ground and bring it inside to a warm area because it will not survive. But he says a hardy bulb, like a daffodil or tulip, can stay in the ground all year because it prefers cold temperatures. Sandra Mason from the University of Illinois Extension Service has some suggestions to get a good start on planting bulbs. First, the most important thing is to choose a place with soil that drains well. She says how wet the soil is, that ends up being a big issue. For certain areas, if you have a lot of clay in your soil, you may find that bulbs do not last a long time, just a couple years. Or you may find they just do not do very well at all, and they actually rot in the soil. Sandra Mason suggests planting most big bulbs, like tulips or daffodils, about 15 to 20 centimeters deep. Smaller bulbs can be planted about 7 to 10 centimeters deep. She says she enjoys planting smaller ones, like snowdrop bulbs. Bulbs should be planted with their pointed end up toward the surface, but some bulbs do not seem to have a pointy end. In that case, Sandra Mason says look for an eye that might have a stem. But don't worry if you cannot find one. She says the good news is the bulbs will figure it out. Bulbs will need water right after planting unless it has been raining regularly. And they will continue to need water as they grow. Do not use fertilizer for the first year. After that, if you do fertilize the bulbs, do not mix the fertilizer in the planting hole. It could burn the roots. There is a trick people can use to grow bulbs in places where the ground never freezes. Keep the bulbs cold in a refrigerator for about 3 months. Then take them out and let them get used to the warmth. Now the bulbs will be ready to develop normally, colorful blooms and all. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn more about the world every day and learn English at the same time at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Bulbs are underground plant stems that provide food for a shoot. Some bulbs produce flowers year after year. Gardening experts say tulips, daffodils, and other bulbs are not very difficult to grow. Bulbs do well in climates with a cold season. They are placed in the ground about the time of the first frost. But with the right preparation, they can also grow well in places where the ground never freezes. Mike Lazotte of American Meadows, an online store, says before you start, you need know whether to plant tender bulbs or hardy bulbs. If you live in a cold area, a tender bulb will need special care when the growing season is over. If you want that bulb to survive or come back, you would need to literally dig it out of the ground and bring it inside to a warm area. But Mike Lazotte says a hardy bulb, like a daffodil or tulip, prefers cold temperatures, so it can be left in the ground. Sandra Mason from the University of Illinois Extension Service has some suggestions to get a good start on planting bulbs. The most important thing is to choose a place with soil that drains well. For certain areas, if you have a lot of clay in your soil, you may find that bulbs do not last a long time for you, as in just a couple years. Or you may find they just do not do very well at all, and they actually rot in the soil. Sandra Mason suggests planting most big bulbs, like tulips or daffodils, about 15 to 20 centimeters deep. Smaller bulbs can be planted about 7 to 10 centimeters deep. She says she enjoys planting smaller ones, like snowdrop bulbs, because you do not need to dig a very deep hole. Bulbs should be planted with their pointed end up toward the surface, but some bulbs do not seem to have a pointy end. In that case, Ms. Mason says look for an eye that might have a stem, but don't worry if you cannot find one. Bulbs will need water right after planting, unless it has been raining regularly. And they will continue to need water as they grow. Do not use fertilizer for the first year. After that, if you do fertilize the bulbs, do not mix the fertilizer in the planting hole. It could burn the roots. There is a trick people can use to grow bulbs in places where the ground never freezes. Keep the bulbs cold in a refrigerator for about 3 months. Then take them out and let them get used to the warmth. Now, the bulbs will be ready to develop normally, colorful blooms and all. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Kickstarter is a website where people give money to support creative projects. It started in 2009, mostly to help artists and musicians. Now, inventors, people starting businesses, and a growing number of farmers are raising money on this site for crowdsourced funding. Josh Brill and Meadow Squire grow vegetables and rice in Teignmouth, a town in the northeastern state of Vermont. Last year, they used Kickstarter to raise more than $6,000 to increase their rice production. 76 people watched the couple's 6-minute video and believed enough in their dream to send them money. Another farmer in Vermont, Scott Nelson, raised almost $9,000. He wanted to document the growth and development of his farm to teach others who are interested in organic farming, as a video explained. Bigger ideas have raised much more for some farmers among the projects on Kickstarter. In all, on a recent day, there were 4,500 creative projects seeking money on the site. Site officials reported $3 million in weekly pledges. To raise money on Kickstarter, people need to think of a project with a clear goal. Then, they need to get the project approved by the site. Many project creators make a video to explain what their project is and why people should support it. Projects have a time limit, generally about 30 days, to meet their funding goal. Kickstarter uses an all-or-nothing funding method. Projects do not get any money unless they meet their goal. Kickstarter gets 5% of the money raised, but only if the goal is met. Amazon.com takes another 3 to 5% for credit card processing fees. To get people to pledge money, projects also include a list of thank you gifts for different levels of support. Josh Brill and Meadow Squire gave supporters rice, seeds, and, for fun, good karma points. They say they are happy with their experience using the site to raise money for their new rice paddies. Meadow Squire calls it free advertising for them. Many people now know they grow rice and know more about their farming practices. She points out that the experience would not have been the same if they had just gotten a loan from a bank. Josh Brill says one pledge came all the way from New Zealand. In his words, when someone is willing to put up their money for your farm, that means something. It's like you would feel bad if you couldn't succeed for them. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.